And we are live. Hello, Dr. David Lee. Thank you so much for joining me. We are going to be talking about some really interesting stuff today because a lot of the work you do is involved in trying to get people to a better place in life when we live in this horrendous environment of being a sandwich generation pulled in all different directions. So let me give you a quick introduction because, and I am going to read this because you've done an awful lot of stuff. So excuse me reading. I don't normally do this. Normally I remember, but not today. So Dr. Lee David, you are a GP, CBT therapist and author of well-being books and for all age groups and also for the healthcare professionals as well, which you've done a lot of work with over the last few years. You are known for being for your clear advice and being able to distill things in a very digestible manner. You're also a regular speaker at conferences and in the media, and you host a podcast called The Choice Space, where you discuss the realities of modern life and give down-to-earth tips on some of the things that we can practically do to support our health and well-being, which is crucial at the moment because literally we are that generation that, we're working hard. Some of us have got sick parents. Some of us have got small kids, teenage kids. We are literally pulled in every direction. So when people come into your clinic, what are you seeing?
Well, I see exactly what you just described there, Fiona, which is we see an individual person. And I think the first thing to say is, seeing perimenopausal women, their physical health is one piece of the jigsaw, and it's a really important piece, but it is a piece of a whole person. So what I see is a person, and that person brings all sorts of things. They bring responsibilities, they bring pressures, they're often carers, as you say, they're upward caring, maybe for frail elderly parents, they may be caring for children, maybe they're teens, maybe they're also grieving children leaving home, and there's that whole sort of transition period around life. And often actually what I'm seeing is that women in this period are also quite senior at work often and carrying lots of responsibility, because actually it's a time of life where people do have amazing skills and capabilities, and so then increased pressure there too. And it's just this sense of trying to hold it all. And I feel like, you just think about the word, the sandwich generation, and it feels like, if it is a sandwich, the bits of the bread get very thick, and then the bit in the middle, which is the person, gets squashed by the weight of all the other things that are being held. And so whether it's looking after our physical health, whether it's looking after our mental health, whatever choices we make, I think they end up being the last thing that we do, or they don't get done at all. They get squeezed out. And I think for me, the first thing that I would always do is to step back and say, okay, can we get an overview of you as a person? What are the things that we are juggling? And it might be life pressures. There may well also be symptoms, physical symptoms. There may be emotional symptoms as well. So there might be anxiety. There may be low mood. There may be loss of confidence. There may be sleep problems. And so we need to kind of get this map, if you like, of all of the factors that are involved. And I think it's really key to say, sometimes people get quite worried about the idea of CBT around the menopause and think, does that mean that physical stuff doesn't matter? Or, is it? And actually, I think it's really important to highlight right at the start that it may be that we're not finding time to go and actually have our health checks and have the medical side dealt with effectively. So it's absolutely not replacing medical care. It goes alongside, it goes hand in hand. And I often talk about twin tracks care.
Yeah, hang on. Let me just take you back there for a second because you're going at 100 miles an hour on me. So let me just unpick a few of the things that you said there. So coming back to the CBT, if you remember when the last menopause guidelines came out, and there was a lot of stuff in there that was saying you can consider CBT as an alternative or an adjunct. And a lot of people got quite upset because they then kind of thought, well, hang on a second, you're telling me that this is all in my head. What is it that we're not understanding about CBT? Because it's not sitting down on a psychiatrist sort of sofa talking about, past trauma and all these sorts of things. It's a talking therapy. So how does it actually help people?
Well, it's a talking therapy. It's also a behaviour therapy, and that behaviour might be I need to go to the doctor and sort out my medical care. So it's not saying that it's and so I think what I would look at is a twin tracks approach. We need to optimise physical health, we need to optimise mental health and well-being, and often the two are very much interdependent. So how we respond to symptoms is as important in their impact on us as the symptoms themselves. And so for some people where maybe mental health symptoms like feeling low or anxious are really directly linked to menopausal symptoms, then it's really important to optimize that care. And that may well involve things like hormone replacement therapy and other treatments. For other people, it may be that there are also factors in how we respond when symptoms come, and how the behaviours that we're doing, or maybe we might be finding it hard to do some of the lifestyle changes that are being recommended that we also know are very effective for menopause. And so we just take this holistic view where we look at what's going on physically and how do we optimize that, and then how do we support people to look at how they're thinking, what are the emotions that are coming up, and what are their behaviors, and are there any traps that they've got caught into that might actually unfortunately end up meaning that we're not responding as helpfully as we might.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, isn't it? Because I don't think that people sort of understand just how helpful it can be. I love it. I've done it for anxiety, and I've done it for my sleep, and it's one of those. I think that CBT should be in schools because I think it's an incredible resilience tool. It's one of those. It's really about reframing the way you look at things. But before we get to all of those, let me sort of run. When you said we're unpacking people's really busy lives, they're coming in and they're going, oh my God, I've got all of these horrendous things happening. Let's sort of break it down. But we're often thrown, and I know I've done this a million times myself when I do posts, the platitude is thrown out. It's like, well, prioritise sleep. And as somebody came back to me the other day and sort of said, gee, you don't think I already thought of that? Well, what am I going to do? Same with stress, reduce stress. Well, I mean, can you actually really reduce stress when you're pulled in a million better ways? Is it then about coping better with them? So let's run through some of these, and we'll come to vasomotor symptoms sort of towards the end, and how importantly they sort of cross into a lot of these things. But let's have a look at sleep for a start. So we've got all of those sleep hygiene things that we know about, lighter clothes, dark, quiet room, layered bed sheets or whatever. What if we've gone past that stage where sort of, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock, I'm not going back to sleep again, I'm staring at the ceiling and I'm worrying about the fact that tomorrow my life is going to be ruined and I'm not going to be able to cope at work? What do we do? What are the practical things that we can actually do to improve our situation?
Yeah, so it's worth saying that all the things that we mentioned, the sleep hygiene, the having the dark room, those are really fundamental things that we need to do. And then there are lots of other things that we can add on top of that. And if we've got to the point where we've actually developed insomnia, so our sleep is habitually problematic, so night after night after night, we're not getting great sleep, then it's likely that there are patterns that we've fallen into that are unfortunately worsening how we respond. Because actually you can be woken at night for lots of reasons and then get back to sleep. So it's not automatically the case that it's always. So if there are symptoms like night sweats, you're getting up to go to the loo, then yes, those symptoms can wake us at night. But what they don't have to do is lead to this really severe insomnia where we're getting very poor sleep and we're getting very stressed about our sleep. And I think that's where we often fall into a pattern that it can become a problem. There's really good evidence that CBT for insomnia, which is a kind of specific area of CBT, is very effective for people who have comorbid conditions, so anything going alongside that might be affecting sleep. So that's not just menopausal symptoms, it might be pain, it might be urinary symptoms, lots of things can affect us at night and mean that we wake up more often. But we know that the CBT for insomnia does help. So then we think about, okay, what does that look like? So I'm going to take you through I really like a model called CALMS, CALMS, which is a set of kind of strategies that we can use. It was written by a sleep insomnia specialist called Louise Berger, and she runs a sleep clinic and she's brilliant about sleep. So C stands for conditioned arousal. And what does that mean? It sounds a bit sort of long-winded, but basically what that means is if you lie in bed awake a lot, then you start to learn that bed means wake. It doesn't mean sleep. You just get used to being awake. So as soon as you go to bed, the brain's like, oh, time to wake up and party. And so instead of, for example, if that happens, going on our phone and scrolling, which wakes up the brain even more. And I'm just going to do a quick aside there because Louise, in fact, I did an episode with her and she was saying we hear a lot about blue light being the problem with phones and screens, but she was saying, and I think this is really interesting, it's not so much the light, it's more about what's on the phone that actually wakes us up.
It just makes you angry again. I know if I did it, I'd get onto Instagram and I'd see something that would make me really angry again, and I'd spend the next 2 hours ruminating about how wrong that was.
Exactly. So we see something political, we see something stressful, we see an email from work, we notice something else that we've got to do tomorrow, and suddenly we're like, oh, how am I going to fit all that in? So immediately our brain is completely woken up. So the rule about the conditioned arousal is that don't spend lots of time lying in bed awake or doing wakeful things. We need to start retraining the brain to go, no, bed is for sleep and just for being intimate. And so we just have to do that in bed. And maybe some sort of wind down activity. So, maybe not looking at the screen, but listening to an audio book or something like that that's kind of calming. And then if you're awake for a long period, the theory is we should get up. So don't lie in bed for ages.
Which
get
is
up.
not really enticing in a morning.
It is not.
No.
So if you really can't, and I have people who are like, look, I can't do that. Then I would say, well, okay, but don't do your screen. Put on an audio book and listen to something soothing. And I would often say, my practical advice is listen to something that's interesting enough that you don't get bored or switch off and start worrying, but it's soothing enough that it's not going to really trigger you. And so it's kind of finding something that's just like quite a calm story, and that or music that's interesting enough that keeps you kind of engaged but not. So if you really can't get up, then do something that doesn't involve using your eyes and sort of engaging. But if possible, they would the CBTI people, I'm a bit more flexible, but they like you to get up. And then go back to bed and try again. A few more things. I won't do it in all detail, but I think there are some practical stuff here. So A is attempts to control, and that's just the idea that the more you try and force yourself to sleep, is the worse it'll be. And that's a bit like if you plant seeds in your garden and you go outside and you start shouting, grow, hurry up, and grow. They don't tend to grow any faster. And so actually we can't force ourselves to sleep. All we can do is create the conditions that will mean sleep will come if it comes. So we kind of have to let go of trying to control something that's outside our control and accept, I might not sleep, but you know what? Okay, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to create the conditions, and actually that's probably good enough. And so it's letting go of this pressured outcome, because the more I need to be asleep, the more awake you actually are, right?
Question over here that's just come in, and this is actually a very good question. It's 4 a.m. is the time when I regularly wake up, and I'm wide awake and I'm and ready for a work day. Should I get up and start my day then? Is it, should we be going together better earlier? Is that our natural circadian rhythm? God help us, I could not bear that. Or is it better than are there other things that she could actually do, like reducing that anxiety and not feeling so wide awake, or that didn't involve getting up and thinking, right, my day has started?
So there's lots of options around that. And what I'd be doing is mapping out the sleep and trying to get a sleep, a timetable. So I'd say, okay, for the next few nights, keep a track of roughly what time you go to bed, roughly what time you fall asleep, how many times you wake up, at what times they are, and what time you finally wake up, and then what time you get up. And then you'll get a rough idea of how much time you're asleep and how much time you're awake. And what that can do is, it may be that this person is going to bed quite early because they're worried about not sleeping enough. And so they're ending up going to bed 9 o'clock. Oh, 8:30, I'm so tired, I'm dropping off. Or maybe they're dozing in the evening in front of the TV. I know I get so tired in the evening, I've actually had to start knitting when I'm watching TV to stop myself falling, because that little movement, it keeps me awake. Otherwise I'll drop off and then I don't sleep very well at night. So
It's also quite relaxing, actually, too, isn't it? Just, I've got
100%.
to show you something, which is really insulting to people who knit and crochet, but and you will laugh, but I've just become a grandmother, and I thought before the baby was born that I would attempt to do the right thing that a grandmother should do, and that is crochet a blanket. So one day when we were running our education course, while we were in between the talks and things like that, I thought I'll have my first go at crocheting since I was about 12. And this sad-looking thing was the result. So I thought, this is incredibly insulting. Well, I'll get rid of that. And so one other night I sat down and I thought, okay, I'm going to have a go at this while I'm watching TV. And it did improve. I got to this stage, but I found it so relaxing. I actually slept like a baby that night.
And what I would say is that is the goal of doing that crochet. It is lovely to get, we're not necessarily trying to be employed as crocheters, your whatever the word is.
Really, I
So it's kind of like, can I just do this? So we need to take the pressure off, and this is back to that expectations in life. We're often quite perfectionists. We want to get it right. We want that crochet to be right. We want our sleep to be right. We want our kids to be okay. We want our jobs to be okay. And so we're really focusing on getting all these perfect outcomes, and that focus on the future, that focus on, is this good enough? And it doesn't matter if it's sleep, crochet, or my kids' grades. All of those sort of future focused stresses take us into a place of anxiety. They create, the cortisol starts pumping through the system, and we feel very agitated, and it makes it harder to respond, whether it's to when we have a hot flush in the day, or whether it's when we're wakeful at night. Or we lose our kind of reflective, thoughtful, wise brain, because we go into threat. So our threat brain wakes up, and immediately it's like fight, flight, freeze. There's a danger here. There's a lion about to come in through the bedroom door and eat me. So why would I go to sleep right now? So we're telling the brain, look, there's danger. So we need to be starting to say to the brain, look, this is safe. And funnily enough, the way to tell our brain that this is safe is to take the pressure off. And that doesn't matter whether it's crochet or whether it's out and about. And this principle is something that I do all the time with people, is that coming back to the here and now. So going back to the person who said, okay, I'm wake at 4 a.m. I'd be wanting to know, are you going to bed too early, and actually you wake up at 4 because really that's the amount of sleep you've had, 7 hours, and actually you are done, in which case you might want to go to bed a bit later so that it's slightly more sort of and be a bit tireder for a few days. And then move it forward? Or is it that you're waking up and doing stuff and waking yourself up and actually getting worried about it, and then sleeping in later or having a nap during the day, which is actually making it? And what we're after here is sleep pressure. And sleep pressure is the drive to sleep. And like, we want to grow our sleep pressure. We want to feel like our bodies are like, yes, I need sleep, rather than doing things that take away the sleep pressure. So I think it's about looking at the patterns, looking at what we do when we do wake up, and then trying to create a routine that actually supports the reality, which might be not as much sleep as I'd really like, but do you know what? I can get by. And I think it's trying to guess. L is the loss of sleep confidence. And it's this idea that I'm not doing it well enough. And again, I see this in all aspects. I'm not working well enough. I'm not parenting well enough. I'm not sleeping well enough. And we're feeling under pressure. We're not feeling good enough. And that creates more anxiety. And it, by definition, makes our sleep worse.
Yeah. If we don't want to get out of bed, and we've gone through, we've now told ourselves that, listen, when we were younger, we used to manage to party till we were 4 a.m. and still managed to go to work. If we have kids, we know we went through many years of not sleeping, and we managed. So by the time we've calmed ourselves down, then we're getting rid of those sort of negative thoughts that our entire life will fall apart because we haven't had a decent night's sleep. Are there other things that we can do then that will help us get back into a reasonable amount of sleep? So breathing techniques or relaxation techniques or other things like that are practical that we can use and apply?
Yeah, so a few things. I would be saying, cut out the clock watching. Typically, I don't think it helps, because if you know it's 4 or 5 or 3, then it makes you think about it. So, if you wake up and it's 4, don't turn the clock around. Don't be thinking about, it's 4, because that just feels stress. So take the clocks away. I would also say switch off your watches or whatever that you're using that monitors your sleep to tell you is it good enough or not, because I just think those we kind of know that we don't need an electronic device, and it's just another set of data to worry about.
Anxiety, doesn't it?
100%. And so yes, some, if you've got really high tech and you've got some kind of athlete who's trying to monitor, fine, but for the vast majority of us, we don't need that level of information, and too much information typically creates more anxiety because you get information overload. And again, we're comparing ourselves against, is it good enough, and I think a lot of the threat is this internal sense of I'm not living up to my own expectations. That's what I do a lot of work around, is just being a bit kinder to ourselves and being a little bit more compassionate. And it's amazing how that has an impact for sleep and so many other parts of life if we can just be a little bit more compassionate. Other things that are very sort of practical ideas, I would be saying, try not to nap, or if you do nap, only 20 minutes before midday. So try not to nap in the afternoon. And if you do want to have a nap, keep it early and really short. So less than 20 minutes, or, maybe up to 2 p.m. Doing exercise, and we know that physical movement is great it helps manage menopausal symptoms. It helps manage mental health symptoms. It reduces our anxiety. It lifts our mood. It makes us feel more able to cope. It reduces stress. It helps manage all the pressures of life. There's so many reasons it's good. That leaning into being active during the day is amazing. But we also need to think about the tone that we bring to that, because we can turn that into another to-do list that I'm failing at. And that's what I see time and time again. People saying, well, I know I should be going to the gym and I don't manage it and I feel so bad about myself and I know I'm just to blame. And so there's this kind of layers of blame and shaming that so many women experience because they're struggling to be able to get everything fit, to fit everything in.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that we're also thrown at, and we sort of touched on that about the stress and anxiety in there, is reduce stress. Such a big statement for such an incredibly complex thing to do. Are there any practical steps? I mean, to me, it's probably, I don't know how you can reduce stress. Is it more about learning how to cope with stress better? And are there practical steps there that we can take that actually they would help our sleep for a start, but practical things that we can bring in that actually will help us reduce our stress, even if we are time poor?
Well, I think I'd change that, because I think reducing stress sets up a very difficult thing, and it means that it's a kind of a pass fail. If you feel stressed and you're telling yourself I'm supposed to reduce stress, and then you feel a bit stressed because you've had 6 emails and the kids have got loads to do, and your mum's had a fall, then why wouldn't you be stressed? So I feel like that is not necessarily the goal. I think regulating our distress is a much more helpful idea. And what that means is I'm going to notice if I'm in threat, and I'm going to help manage the difficult feelings that arise. Now, that doesn't mean getting rid of them, because sometimes it's actually sadness might be a sense of loss. It might be grief, for example. And so why would we want to get rid of that? I think feeling better doesn't mean not having emotions. It means understanding what they are and then thinking about how do I move my life in a positive direction. So I reframe it immediately to say, can we learn how to name what's going on for us? Can we start to create some understanding? Is this anxiety? Am I worrying about stuff that's perhaps, am I catastrophizing? Am I imagining worst case scenarios that are actually not going to happen? And can I bring my attention back? So if we're thinking about the future and all these awful things that may or may not happen, we can't change the future, right? We're only in the present, so that's immediately out of our control, and our brains are capable of imagining the absolute wildest possibilities that are probably actually not going to happen. So I would be like, okay, let's come back to being more present. And being present is I'm going to be aware of how I'm feeling, and maybe I'm feeling a bit tense, I'm feeling a bit stressed, and then I can name that. I'm going to observe with my 5 senses, so I'm going to do some grounding to help myself regulate my feelings. So to slow exhale, create a little pause, notice my feet on the ground, maybe think, am I going into fight, flight, freeze? Oh, I've got to rush around. Just pause, let the shoulders back down, stretch your neck, just notice, okay, and maybe wriggle our toes, notice some colours, have a sip of our coffee, just drink it slowly, give yourself a moment. Okay, and then I would say, okay, what is actually important to focus on next? What does my wise men tell me I need to do? Now I've made a bit of space for distress. So instead of thinking, how do I get rid of all that stress, which I don't think is possible, we can
Was
say,
this where you take up yoga, take up meditation? And I was thinking, I don't have an extra hour in a day to go to a class and lie on a mat and look at the ceiling. As much as I would really love to, it's just not going to happen. So basically, what you're saying is, then it can be almost like a mindfulness snack.
exactly that. And then come back to, and mindfulness doesn't just have to be taking ourselves off. Now, if people want to go and do yoga, then amazing, I totally support it. But if they're like, do you know what, I'm struggling with that, then actually, yes, you can find a few minutes here or there. I would really encourage people to go outside, look at the sky, get a few breaths of fresh air, get some perspective, because that immediately regulates us. It makes us, and the thing is, if you think about your threat brain, when we go into threat, fight, flight, freeze, our amygdala, the part of the brain that triggers stress and threat is triggered. And all we can think about is danger and stress and worry. And it doesn't help us to deal with that very well, because it's only evolved to cope with this short-term risk. So what we need to do is settle that bit down and say, look, it's okay, I'm safe, this is stressful, this is difficult, but I don't have, this isn't a panic session. There isn't a lion about to eat me this minute. So I've got a bit of time to think about what to do. And if I can just give myself a minute, and then our wise brain will often show up a bit slower, a bit late to the party, but it will come and they'll be like, okay, right, mum's not well, so I need to phone the carer, I need to do this, okay, I need to make sure that I've put something in place for that, and need to get some, kids need some food. So okay, and breathe. This is a stressful day. This is how I'm going to approach it. So it doesn't eliminate the stress necessarily, but it does give us some space to be able to navigate how we address it. And then there is one more piece to that, which I think, and I'm interested whether you feel sort of recognize this, but is it that we're getting so caught up in everyone else's agenda that we're not actually prioritizing our own needs at all? We're kind of missing. And so is it something about giving ourselves permission to look after ourselves?
Because if we don't, and actually I've just had this conversation with a family member who, because there's a lot of illness on one side of the family at the moment, I think, and I'm literally saying, if you don't look after yourself, you aren't going to be able to look after anybody else. You absolutely have to make some sort of time for yourself, even if it's 10, 15 minutes just to go for a walk around the block, just to clear your head. But I think that is right. We do tend to, because everybody's making demands all the time, and it's always us that's got to be providing for it. And it's really hard to actually sort of say, what, for a minute, I just need to step away. But it's an important coping skill.
It is. And I think we sometimes get into this idea that there's a competition, like that, or that it's competitive, that if I'm caring, because we often hold this value, and I think it's a really lovely thing. A lot of the women I work with are very caring individuals, and they care a lot about their families, they care about their work, they care about their colleagues, their friends, their partners, and I think that's such a wonderful quality. But it feels like if I care for them, there's no room to care for me. And it's a bit like if you had a torch and you're just shining the torch on everybody else, that means that I have to be in the dark because I'm not allowed to be cared for if they're all being cared for. I don't have enough space. There's not enough light for all of us. And so the analogy I would give, instead of thinking that you can only shine the light in one direction, that we think about, okay, the value is, I care about everybody, and that includes me. So it's like having a nice night light that's on the table, that's got a warm glow. Everyone sat around the table. We are around that table as well as individuals, and our family and all the people we care about, all being lit up by the light. And if that's the case, if the value is I want to show up as a caring person, then actually that skill that we have with others, we can just start to bring ourselves into it. So it's not something we don't know how to do. It's actually the questions that we're just missing ourselves out of the equation. So it doesn't have to be me or them. It can be me and them. You know, how do I look after everyone in this complex world we live in? And I think as parents, a lot of the people I'm working with are parents of children of different ages. And I think modeling something about self-care is really important, like that oxygen mask on first. We can't just keep giving to others and think that that's what we're supposed to do, because that sort of teaches everybody that that's the right way, that's the role in life. And I feel like we can move beyond that, where it's actually we all matter, all our feelings matter, and self-care matters alongside that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And especially when there are so many cultural things that come in this. Somebody posted something the other day saying, and I think that this is probably across pretty much every culture, but women are expected in certain cultures to do, if there's a feast on, or if there's whatever it is, they have to do everything. They've got to serve everybody first. They've got to do this, and this is incredible pressure to be, not only holding down this incredible job and doing everything right, but also then being there to be the one that has to prepare and do and present and all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes there's nothing really wrong in sort of saying, can somebody help?
Exactly that. And actually, often people are quite willing to help when we ask for it. I think often we have a role that we start to identify with, but I need to be the one that always copes. And if I'm not, then I'm somehow failing. And it's back to this idea of being a sort of perfectionist about our expectations, just having very unreasonable expectations of how much we're supposed to do. And that can lead to, I think, one of the commonest triggers that I see for stress. So we're talking about, if we go back to the idea of how do I reduce stress, I think it's about cognitive load. And that is, how many things am I trying to do at the same time in a very small amount of space? And if we're scheduling in so many different things all at once, and there's just not really enough time to do any of them completely, and there's no space in between any of those things, then we are going to feel stressed. I think it's almost impossible if that is our schedule. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to be busy, but I think sometimes it's about thinking, when am I allowed to say, giving myself permission to choose? I don't have to say yes to everything. So people say, oh, could you just help out with this extra project at work? Or could you help run the PTA, this year? Could you just do that? And of course, because we're caring people, we want to say yes. But I think it's worth remembering there's an opportunity cost, that every time we say yes to something, we're saying no to so many other things. Might be saying no to time with our family. We might be saying no to time to wind down. We might be saying no to doing something that physically lifts us and helps us manage our menopausal symptoms. And so,
you can't, or at least put a sort of caveat on it that says, all right, well, I can do this, but under these terms and conditions.
Yes, exactly. So I think what often helps, because I've been reading a book called Deny by an author called Sunita Sarr, who talks about how hard it is to say no. And she talks about the idea of values rather than it being about just saying no. It's about thinking what matters. And that really aligns with how I would approach therapy, because I think we need to come back to basics and think, what are the most important things in my life? What really matters? And actually, I need to prioritize my time. As a doctor, we do something called triage. If you have a load of people who've been in an accident, then you find the people who are most severely injured and you deal with them, prioritize them. And then people, everyone else, you kind of go in turn through severity. And we kind of need to approach that to all of the stuff, because sometimes you get someone who might only have a broken fingernail, but they might make a lot of noise about that. And so actually, it's trying to recognize that some of the things in our lives that are quite noisy and pressurized may not be the most important things for us as individuals, and giving ourselves permission to pause and think, what really matters here? And actually, if I've got limited time, which I do, I can only have one of me, and I've only got 24 hours in the day. And if that's true, rather than telling myself off, because what often happens is people become critical of themselves when they can't split themselves into 10,000 pieces. They give themselves up and think they're failing. They say, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing this. Oh, I did mess that up. And so we lose confidence. And I think that then has a big impact when we then get other symptoms. So, for example, then we have vasomotor symptoms, which are just another thing to have to deal with. And it's just overload to have to then deal with physical symptoms at the same time as all of this other stuff. And
Yeah,
so creating some space is
exactly.
key.
It is. It absolutely is. And you just described my life thing, because I always say, oh my God, I'm not doing anything well. All these things like juggling 15 million balls. But I have actually learned now to actually say, yes, I can, because I'm such a fence sitter. I can never say no to anybody. So what I now will actually say to them is, I can't do it now, but I will be able to do it once I've got these other things out of the way, if that's all right with you. So at least that I'm sort of putting them into a time frame where I probably possibly can do them, which is not good. But vasomotor symptoms. Now, this runs underneath sleep. It runs underneath mood. It runs underneath anxiety. It runs underneath a whole bunch of things. And we know that HRT is the gold standard for treating it, but there are many people who can't take it or choose not to take it. And also it doesn't get rid of all of them for a lot of people. What other things can we do then to help us cope with those that are going to help, stop us waking up at night in a night sweat, and also make us, if we are being drenched in sweat at work in the middle of a presentation or whatever, that we actually cope with them better? What can we do?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about CBT with vasomotor symptoms is that it focuses, that the evidence suggests that it helps people feel less distressed about the symptoms. So they get less bothered by them. They're like, am I bothered? I'm not that worried about having them anymore. And so that is a relief in its own right, even if the symptoms are still present sometimes. We don't get so worked up. And I think you can imagine a vicious cycle where when someone gets very tense and anxious and stressed, they're more likely to have another one. And so you may well get a reduction in the number. So I think there's kind of two parts to that. And yes, as you say, having treatment can be really effective, and absolutely would encourage that. And some people choose not to, or they might not be able to have hormone replacement therapy, for example. And so we need to have other approaches, and we need to not be too perfectionist as well about, I mustn't ever have any. And we need to be realistic. So what would CBT do? Well, it would start to map them, and it would look at things like, when they come, what's the worst bit about it for me? And for a lot of people, it's a social anxiety. They start worrying about, how am I going to be perceived? And we know that with social anxiety, people tend to exaggerate in our minds. We don't just see ourselves looking a little bit hot and sweaty. We have a version of us looking bright red in the face, pouring with sweat, and like really kind of like a caricature version of what we might appear to others, when vast majority of the time others may not even notice, particularly because people are not actually that, they're not that good at noticing. And so one of the important things is to start to get people to reduce that sense of exaggeration of how bad they are, reduce the catastrophic meaning about what it means. If I had a symptom in a meeting, for example, it would be so humiliating. Everyone would think less of me. They would think they would think I'm not capable of doing my job, that I can't lead the team. And so again, we'd reframe that to the idea that actually having symptoms is part of life. We're starting to normalize menopausal symptoms. There's a lot more conversation that I'm hearing in the workplaces around that. And actually, our worth is not dependent on whether we have a hot flush or not, right?
No.
It's based on the last 20 years or whatever, or longer, that we've been doing our job, and all our knowledge and experience. That does not get wiped out by a hot flush, okay? And so it's trying to remember that, I think, is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. So much in these things, isn't there? I'm just going to touch on one more. I'm sorry if you can hear noise in the background, but I'm having a door replaced today, and there's work going on in the corridor outside me. So sorry if you can hear noise in the background. The other thing is, when it comes to losing weight and exercise more, this is a big one. Is it, well, just exercise more? It's like, when, how? So when people come in, because we are a growing population, not just in terms of the number of us, but in the size of us at the moment. When people come to you and say, well, I am worried about my weight, but I don't have time to do anything, what can people do to help themselves in that area?
Yes. So, and I'm going to come back to that. I just want to say one more thing about the sweats, if that's okay, which is to build confidence because we often end up, when we're very anxious about, socially anxious about the impact of sweats, we end up quite isolated. So we don't take up the challenges. We don't do the speech. We sit back and say, oh, I'll let that junior I'll let somebody else do this. I'm going to sit out of this meeting. I'm not going to go to this. I'm not going to go and meet my friends in case I have a hot flush. And then we miss out socially. And that can often lead to us getting quite low, very isolated, and it has a really negative impact on our self-esteem. So I just wanted to say that what's really important, and what we would spend quite a bit of time working on in therapy, would be a hierarchy of, we'd start really low. We start with something that, if you think about, I talk about the stretch zone, the comfort zone where we feel very safe, but we're not doing things that really we need to be doing that are good for us. The stretch zone where we're just doing a little bit more, and then the overload zone where we don't want to go as far as that. So we're just putting one toe into the stretch zone and doing a bit more, which might mean we're starting to engage more socially. We're not avoiding as much stuff. We're doing things because they matter, rather than because anxiety is telling me I mustn't do this because of the flushes will be so humiliating. So we just need to start exposing ourselves to that and learning that actually people are quite nice, they're very accepting, or else they just don't notice. And actually we can only learn that by doing. So we do need to start doing a bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. 100%. And the I don't have time to exercise.
Yes. So I think that comes back to what we were talking about before, which is what is happening in your day, and actually we might need to map that out. What are we making time for that could be reduced, and what is an actually priority? What are the most important things that we need to be doing? And it's not about pressure and saying, if you don't do this, it's bad, as much as saying, wow, that sounds really hard. You sound really busy. You sound quite tired. And I'm wondering if maybe exercise might actually lift your energy. It might actually be a positive thing that we could start to build in. And what would be the first step? So it's reducing the pressure, taking off maybe people are imagining themselves at the gym, hot and sweaty, having a flush, and feeling embarrassed, surrounded by lots of other people looking all beautiful and perfect. And so that might be our image. So we're doing an avoidant thing because of vasomotor symptoms, for example. So we need to look at, what are the barriers? Is it I'm too busy? Is it actually I'm quite fearful? Is it I'm quite low and I'm quite unmotivated to do exercise? And then we might look at, well, what else are we doing? And I would often find that people are doing other coping strategies for difficult feelings. So they might end up scrolling on their phones for quite long periods of time, for example, because they're tired. And so they get stuck, sit down, stressed. Oh, I'm just going to go on my phone and it will just, take me out and I think that has quite a negative impact, that we feel worse after doing that. Whereas if we do exercise, we typically feel better. So I'd be looking at, well, what do you like doing, and what's the first tiny step? What would be the most micro thing that you could do that would get you moving a bit? Not exercise. Let's take that word away, because most people don't have a good relationship with that word. But moving our body is really good. And I like to think about moving our body for emotional regulation, not just for fitness. So we know that there's important things about, say, strength, as we age, that women need to be thinking about, maybe resistance movement. But if we're not anywhere close to that, then it doesn't help to pressurize on that. So I would say, yes, I love that idea. And I'm very much in favor of people lifting weights and being strong and not worrying about sort of not taking up space, but actually starting to have big muscles and take more space in the room, right? I think that's really great. But if someone's lost confidence and they're really anxious and tired, then I would start really small and maybe just going out for that walk, maybe getting somebody. Can you get a neighbor or a friend and plan to go? Can you join a really slow running club? And the final thing I'm going to say, and I know I'm talking a lot, but is to do it badly. Like your first crochet go, where it wasn't your perfect crochet, where it looked a bit sort of wobbly. That's the kind of exercise we should be trying to do. That is a perfect example.
Yeah, you don't have to get up and run a marathon in 2 hours and 10 minutes. No,
not at all. So you don't even have to run at all. You might just walk, or you might run to a lamppost and then walk.
exactly. Get off the bus to stop earlier, or walk between tube stations or take the stairs between floors, just little
Yes.
things, really.
And if you can make it social, that's for me, that's the biggest thing that I find that people seem to find keeps them going if they struggle with it. If there's something fun about it, and the fun bit is not always the exercise. If people have not had a good relationship with movement, then we need to find another way to make it fun. And so it's not just about just push through and do it. It's like, well, what would make it more enjoyable for you? What would make it easier to say yes? And maybe it's doing a group class, maybe it's doing it somewhere quiet, maybe it's outdoors. If you are getting quite hot, then actually being in the fresh air and doing something outside can be much better, or an air-conditioned gym can feel good, or working out at home. If you're someone who struggles with that, then there's so many things on YouTube you can do. I was talking to someone, they do a walking workout, just on the spot. And you can do that even while you're watching TV, watching a movie. You can still get up and walk some steps. So it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you're antisocial like me, because I hate exercising with other people, and going for a walk, a slow walk, just drives me absolutely batty. It's got to be fast or not at all. And so swimming. And I find it really, really mindful, because you bore yourself so much by the time you've gone up and down a pool 20 times that you've got nothing else to concentrate on but the bottom of the pool and the number of strokes it's taking you to get, because you've run through everything else really by the time you've done that. It can be very, very mindful.
Definitely. And in fact, that comes back to what we were talking about, creating pauses in the day, that actually you don't have to. People think that mindfulness is about going off and sort of meditating and being zen and sort of having hours of time by themselves. But it might be being mindful, doing the washing up mindfully, for example, or stacking the dishwasher. And that can be, you can feel the heat of as you take it out, you can hear the clink as you put it in. And so actually mindfulness is just about pausing and noticing what's here for me right now. And it's like, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I taste, touch, smell? What thoughts are in my mind? Not necessarily thinking them, but just labeling them. Okay, I'm having worry thoughts right now. I'm thinking about, or there's a lot, I'm thinking about this, and this. Okay, I've just labeled those. And are there any emotions? Yeah, actually there's physically, I've got some tension in my chest, my tummy's a bit churning. Okay, and I feel a bit hot, and breathe. And I think those pauses can be incredibly powerful for regulating and reducing that ramping up of stress and pressure, which I think contributes to vasomotor symptoms, and it also contributes to that build-up of stress, because you just don't notice it till it's kind of up to here, and then it's really hard to get it down. So if you can pick it up before, then I think we've got a lot more chance of it being helpful.
Yeah, very, very true. Take home messages, and just before somebody put over here, or go for a walk and crochet. And I was thinking, it couldn't make my crocheting being any worse, but
just watch out for the potholes. I'm thinking, I think I'm not the most coordinated. I think I'd be flat on my face straight away if I tried to do that one. But I think it's do everybody has to be themselves. And do you know what? The one thing I think about therapy is everyone is so unique, and it is why it's a real sort of honor in a way to work with people, because you hear about people's individual kind of ideas and beliefs and how they live and the things they love to do. And you could not invent it. People are so unique. And I think people have to find their own thing that works for them. And it's not about what I think or you think. It's what actually, and we have to be quite creative. So I would really invite people to bring a sense of curiosity to, instead of this, I need to live up to this, I need to do that, which is all about threat, because then I'm not doing it well enough. Come back to being present and then being curious. I wonder what would happen if I tried. And then if it doesn't work out, we don't need to be like, oh no, it's just like, okay, all right, that's not, I've learned not that. And then try something else. And I think that kind of attitude can help us weave through, because life is so complex that there isn't a one size fits all. So we have to be able to play a little bit and be curious about, what can I do this week that will help me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. If people want to find you, where can they find you? And your books and things like that, where can they find those?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at dr.lee.david. And my website is www.thechoicespace.co.uk, and the Choice Space podcast as well is the podcast, and that's on all the major platforms. And there's books, just pop Dr. Lee David CBT into Amazon or any bookstore, and they should come up as well. So if people do have teens, for example, we've got some bite-sized books that try and bring these principles alive for our teenagers. And I think a number of the women I work with do have teens who've got anxiety or low mood, and body image. We have a book on body image, which I think is a massive topic for our current young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And we should do this again.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks.